Hello guys, Croft is here. This is the third and final part of the complete engineer lore series. In this third volume we'll cover the Alien Master narrative and the Prometheus documentary, exploring the engineer's mythology and origins. We'll also delve deep into the topic of the Deacon, a creature that the engineers worshipped. Additionally, we'll review what we'll see in Alien Awakening based on Ridley Scott's deleted interview where he seemed to have revealed far too much far too soon. We'll also review the return of the engineers in supplementary materials. In addition to explaining every known engineer on screen and in other media, we'll cover the Offspring of Romulus, a horrifying engineer hybrid, as well as the engineers' so-called ancient citizens. Lastly, we'll delve into the deleted dialogue from the opening sacrifice ceremony and address the question of whether the engineers created the predators. So let's start with the Alien Master narrative. At the very early stages of production, when writers came up with the idea of engineers, they presented Ridley Scott a blueprint describing the engineers' civilization and their history in a nutshell. So let's analyze this document and other parts of early scripts shown in the documentary that reveal many new details about the engineers' origins that we haven't seen anywhere before. The document, called the Alien Master Narrative, may seem extremely controversial, but since it's taken directly from the official Prometheus documentary, it is the most accurate and reliable information that we have about the engineer lore and its subsequent evolution. Their civilization is millions of years old. Once engineers expressed themselves as humans do, taking pleasure in music, color, and story. But they've long since learned to see in more dimensions than we do. Their art and ornaments exist on planes imperceptible to human senses. Their constructions look dark and grim to us, but the engineer's eyes see far more than our own. The next thing that we learn in the master narrative actually confirms what is mentioned in the draft script. Individual engineers live for 100,000 years. Ages ago, their race abandoned sex and gender, reproducing by more abstract methods. In recent millennia, they have ceased to reproduce altogether. So there are a few things to unpack here. Just like in the draft script, it's mentioned that engineers live for 100,000 years, which supports the legitimacy of the script. The master narrative also says that the engineers lost their ability to reproduce, just like in the script, and that they were using other abstract methods to recreate themselves. In fact, the draft script reveals that engineers were recreating themselves using the blood of the first Deacon, which is the strange substance that is shown in the waterfall scene, and we'll get back to this part later in the video. These two paragraphs are actually fascinating, and they give an explanation to why David figured out so fast how to use engineers' devices to open doors and operate their ships. Since he's an android, he has more senses than humans, so that's why he could literally see hidden engineers' writings, as engineers visually perceive the world in a larger spectrum, which is illustrated by their dark eyes. So the temple in Prometheus was filled with textures and directions that only David could see. The next paragraph is extremely interesting, and it brings some new extreme ideas that were probably completely rejected. The engineers believe themselves to be on the verge of a great evolution, a transcendence in which they will abandon their physical form and then take flight into the 10-dimensional multiverse as creatures of pure energy. Even though a few words in the sentence were hidden, the user Big Dave on the Alien Covenant forum filled in the blanks. And judging by the parts that are visible, the suggested words, if not exactly reveal what's written, they are certainly extremely close. The idea that engineers were trying to abandon their physical form to become energy beings is really new and extreme. And if actually realized in the movie, it would have been too big of a departure from the existing alien lore at that time. I feel like this part of the engineer's lore was not developed into consecutive scripts because the studio was already taking a bit of a risk by introducing engineers, the Black Goo, and the Deacon to the alien universe. However, given the fact that the engineers' civilization is extremely advanced, it wouldn't be too hard to believe that they could transcend into another dimension and completely abandon their physical form. That would actually explain why there were no other engineers in the galaxy and the reason nobody came to LV-223 to contain the outbreak. The remaining engineers could have abandoned this dimension altogether. The next paragraph from the master narrative had a few blank spots because of the way the pages were presented, however, we can still get the majority of the text. Engineers shepherded the human race towards sentience and civilization, DNA and their habitat, teaching humanity teachers. This part implies that engineers helped humans along their transition to civilization and were teaching their teachers, which may imply that they taught Jesus or maybe Enoch, just like it's mentioned in the draft script. Despite the fact that Prometheus is a sci-fi horror movie, religion is one of its major themes, which is referenced multiple times in the film. In addition, the Jesus connection is confirmed in another alternate script, which further supports the idea that Ridley and script writers initially intended to have some sort of explicit connection between engineers and religious figures. Ridley Scott and John Spaihts explained that originally the idea was that the engineers periodically visited Earth and were perceived as gods by ancient humans. But let's proceed to the next paragraph. They believed humanity would be ready to receive the gift of the engineer knowledge and move through the universe as scientists just as engineers did before them, perhaps to reach transcendence or divinity on their own. This passage mentions the engineer knowledge, which would lead humanity to achieve some sort of a breakthrough similar to the Industrial Revolution or the invention of computers. In Alien Covenant, David also mentions that he learned the engineer ways, which allowed him to operate their ships and probably create new life forms with the black goo. A research station was set up on LV-426, a moon in a nearby system. Benefactors studied the problem of humanity and prepared something. These two paragraphs imply that engineers wanted to give humanity the engineer knowledge that would drastically advance human civilization. However, according to them, humans possess some kind of a flaw that prevented engineers from giving their knowledge. Another interesting detail is that it says benefactors but not engineers studying the problem of humanity. It may imply that engineers on that planet were a special type of engineers, scientists, biological clones, or another subspecies distinguished by a biosuit, and they were actually different from the engineers at the beginning of the movie. It's also important to notice that according to the master narrative, the research station was set up on LV-426. However, Prometheus takes place on LV-223. In the documentary, Damon Lindelof explains that originally they intended Prometheus to be on LV-426. However, they changed the location to LV-223 to possibly add more story later and get to LV-426 in the Prometheus sequel. Unfortunately, we cannot see the rest of the page confirming the origins of the Deacon. However, later in the documentary, when Damon Lindelof explains some of the themes of the movie, the documentary shows a passage from the early draft script. This page on the screen is identical to the one in the draft script, and it doesn't appear in any other scripts that I've seen. So on the upper portion of the same page, the elder engineer explains that the goldish liquid is the blood of the first Deacon, a substance that allowed engineers to reproduce, which is precisely the reason they worshipped the Deacon and created its mural on LV-223, which has obvious parallels to the portrayal of religious figures. There is also a deleted scene called Paradise, in which David tells Shaw what the engineer said to him. The engineer explained that he did not come from LV-223 and that his home world is called Paradise. Paradise is the closest translation David could find, since that's how this place is referenced in several ancient cultures. In the draft script, the translation of the engineer's dialogue says the exact same thing. Again, these similarities prove that the information in the draft script depicts the early version of the engineer mythology. So to summarize, if you combine the master narrative with the information about the first Deacon and the black goo from the early draft script, then we have the following engineer's origin story. After engineers have lost their ability to reproduce, they found a creature that impregnated one of them. And that engineer gave birth to the first Deacon that they worshipped. After the first Deacon died, engineers used its blood to seed life on other planets, including Earth. However, at some point they did not have the Deacon blood anymore, so they decided to synthesize it on their own, which is what the outposts on LV-223 were used for. However, engineers noticed that humans were way more violent than expected, so they were trying to understand why the result of their creation had this violent aspect. That's why they were experimenting on the black goo, which was their version of the blood of the first Deacon, to find out and isolate the violent gene. That's what studying the problem of humanity probably meant. Unfortunately, they succeeded, and by separating the genes that give violent qualities to living creatures, they created the Beast, an extremely hostile organism who's programmed to kill. They decided to use this pathogen to destroy Earth since they were disappointed with it. But then the outbreak happened, which ironically destroyed the engineer outpost on this planet. The rest of the engineer race may have gone extinct because they did not have the blood of the first Deacon. So the outposts on LV-223 were the last engineer settlements trying to synthesize the substance that would allow them to reproduce again. Or maybe the rest of the engineers transcended into the higher dimension and did not care to interact with the world from which they came from. It's hard to determine the exact story, but we know that it's roughly what I just explained. Specific details and technicalities were probably changed, but the core story of the engineers, the black goo, and the Deacon remained the same with regards to the draft script. Occasional spelling mistakes can be explained by the fact that this is a draft version written to be modified shortly after. Apparently there were over 20 draft scripts, and given the fact that the movie had a pretty busy schedule, all writers were probably in a bit of a rush. Therefore, all these things combined prove that at some point of production, the draft script was a legitimate script for Prometheus. However, it was changed and refined, so the majority of the engineer lore was excluded. In the beginning, Prometheus had a lot more narrative about engineers, and making xenomorphs was just a small piece in a much larger picture. However, all of that was cut for various reasons, so the movie had many unexplained elements such as the black goo, the Deacon mural, and others that were sort of loose ends pointing to the early stages of production. In this chapter, we'll be doing an in-depth exploration into the topic of the Deacon and its crucial role in the engineer's origins, a storyline that was unfortunately cut from the movie in the editing process. The mystery of creation of life is one of the main themes of Prometheus, and engineers seem to be the key to solving it. However, as many of you know, most of the engineers' scenes never made it to the screen. But luckily, somebody in the Prometheus production team released the early draft script, which reveals crucial insights about the Deacon and engineers, including the translated dialogue that I covered in my other video and much more. The early draft script has a deep and detailed explanation of the Deacon creature, which is highly related to the black goo and the creation of engineers. I will also explain who is the Deacon creature on the mural and who is the Deacon at the end of the movie, since these two specimens are not exactly the same. The Deacon could be the most important element in the movie because one of the main themes of Prometheus is discovering the origin of life, and the Deacon ties directly to this question. It may seem like engineers could literally create new life forms, and therefore one might think that they possess the secrets of the origin of life. However, as Elizabeth said in the movie, if they created humans, who created them? Which ties to the discovery in the script that even mighty engineers had their version of God in the form of the Deacon. So let's actually dive into the script, starting with the scene in which the crew finds the black goo, the giant head, and the mural. As it's explained in the script, the Deacon is what allowed engineers to continue their existence. which is why they worshipped this creature and created this mural with its depiction. Before entering the room with the black goo ampules, David translates the writings on the wall, which was actually cut from the movie. Only the Chosen One can pass through. This is the sacred ground and must be kept sacred. If you dare to cross onto the sacred ground, you must be punished. This is the birthplace of our Lord, and no being is worthy. A few pages later, when the crew is inside the room with the giant head, Shaw and Holloway rise up and look at the head monument in an astonished gasp of awe. David stops and shines his light up at the mural on the ceiling. The mural shows a creature coming out of the engineer. The engineer on the mural looks identical to the head monument. David looks at the language written on the face and speaks out the language quietly and unheard. David, our chosen one, the chosen one who created our Lord. This is his resting place and our attempt of resurrecting our Lord's blood. By the chosen one, the script means the engineer who sacrificed himself to be a host for the creature they called the Lord, which is actually the first Deacon. As we learn later in the script, Holloway arrives around the back of the monument and shines his light up at another mural embedded on the wall. A strange being unlike any engineer is drawn on the mural. It has its arms out in a cross. The mural shows an image of an engineer that looks exactly like the head monument being attacked and impregnated by some nasty-looking octopus-like creature. Also on the mural is an image of a bipedal, pointy-headed being with its arms stretched out, the first Deacon. Holloway, David, what the hell is that? David translates the writings. Our Lord came from the Chosen One in the time when our ancestors birthed life. His sacred blood was our salvation. His sacred blood through our lips birthed life on other worlds. The movie actually shows the exact same scene. However, it's extremely hard to notice a depiction of an impregnated engineer on the mural. For that reason, most people never realized the story the mural was trying to portray. Then Holloway asks, what do you think is inside these urns or vases, wherever they are? David, I'm not entirely certain, but I believe the humanoid being seen being attacked orally gave birth to this being and your engineers worshipped it. If my translation is correct, then they were trying to recreate the blood of this being whom they worshipped. The wording is extremely vague, but these passages seem to suggest that the black goo was the engineer's attempt to replace the blood of their Lord, a substance that can produce new life forms, which is something that engineers could not yet master despite being interstellar species. However, the black goo failed at producing life forms in the engineer's image, which may suggest that the secret of the creation of life cannot be achieved through scientific or technological progress, since even the most advanced species in the alien universe couldn't attain it. In addition, the early draft script suggests that the giant head monument was built to commemorate the engineer called the Chosen One, who sacrificed himself to give birth to the first Deacon. The first Deacon had unique properties that allowed engineers to use its blood to procreate and see the life forms in the engineer's image on other worlds, exactly like it's portrayed in the beginning of Prometheus. The first few pages of the script have the extended opening scene, which is similar to the deleted scene on Blu-ray. The two engineers, one walking behind the other, stop right next to the river. They turn and face each other. The one standing closest to the river has a young, majestic, pure white face and black eyes. The other is hundreds of thousands of years older than him, and it's evident from the elder's wrinkled, thin, almost wood-like skin. The elder holds out a box, simple but complex design, and kneels down on the rocks and holds up the box. The elder, take this is the blood of our Lord. For we cannot create as the gift was stripped from us long ago. As always, we will continue our attempts to create a perfect Eden, much like our own. You, the Chosen One, will create it in your own image. As it appears from this passage, engineers used the blood of their lord, the first Deacon, to create life on other planets and possibly to reproduce, because as they say, the gift of creating new life was stripped from them, which can also mean procreation. In overall, the dialogue in the beginning of the script confirms David's translations, and if we combine everything together, we obtain the following picture. A long time ago, engineers lost their ability to reproduce and were facing extinction. However, they found a creature, probably an ancient version of a facehugger, that they believed would give birth to the first Deacon, whose blood would allow engineers to create new life. However, this creature needed a host who would be sacrificed to allow the first Deacon to emerge. One of the engineers, whom they called the Chosen One, was willing to sacrifice himself and was impregnated with this ancient facehugger. Then the Chosen One brought to life the first Deacon, presumably in the same way xenomorphs emerged from their hosts. The Engineer Society honored the Chosen One who was willing to sacrifice himself for the salvation of their race, so they built this giant head monument in his memory. The first Deacon was a sacred deity for engineers, and the descriptions are unclear if this creature was hostile like xenomorphs, or if it was intelligent and had human-like characteristics. Maybe there was some kind of a symbiotic or sentient relationship between engineers and the first Deacon. However, after the first Deacon died, engineers used its blood to procreate and seed new life forms on other planets, like we see in the beginning of Prometheus. But after the blood ran out, engineers were facing extinction yet again, and this time they tried to recreate the blood of their lord using their knowledge of biotechnology. However, in their attempts to reproduce the blood of the first Deacon, they created something sinister that would only bring death and destruction: the black goo. It seems like the black goo is not the exact replica of the blood of the first Deacon, since they visually look different and appear to have different effects on organisms that they come in contact with. In the beginning of Prometheus, after ingesting the blood of the first Deacon, the engineer disintegrated into dust. However, when the black goo entered the human body, it caused grotesque mutations and turned the infected human into a hostile monster. If the blood of the first Deacon seemed to create new life, the black goo only resulted in death and annihilation in the form of violent monsters. For that reason, the Deacon that we see at the end of the movie is probably not the same creature that is portrayed on the mural, but a violent and a hostile version of it. If the first Deacon was some sort of a god for engineers, the Deacon that emerged from the black goo can be considered a devil. The black goo, being the opposite of Lord's blood, actually makes xenomorphs demon-like creatures in the alien world. Since the creation of xenomorphs is directly tied to the black goo, it seems like both humans and engineers in Prometheus try to find the secret of the origin of life. Wayland, like many humans, believes that technology can prolong his life, and he desperately tries to escape death by asking his creators for more life. In the same way, engineers tried to extend the life of the race by bioengineering a substance to procreate. In the case of Wayland, his wish is not fulfilled and he ultimately dies. And in the case of the engineers, they fail to recreate the life-giving substance and instead create the black goo that accelerates their extinction. Moreover, the passages that come next in the script confirm what I just explained. After the crew comes back from their visit to the pyramid, David contacts Wayland in his sleep and tells him what he learned from transcriptions on the walls. Since David's primary mission was to report to Wayland, some of the information was not mentioned before. In the script, David was supposed to keep it secret for Wayland. When David joins Wayland in the cryosleep, the billionaire asks him, "What is it that you found anyway?" It's a form of a container for a type of liquid the engineers use. I translated writings on the container to the best of my abilities. Wayland, what did you learn from it? Some of their history, sir. It appears that these beings can live up to 300,000 years. They used to be able to mate with each other just like humans. But somewhere in their late history they evolved and lost the ability to both mate and reproduce. But before they did, they found a creature that impregnated one of them with a foreign body. A creature came from him, they called it the Deacon. They worshipped this Deacon, and after its death they used its blood to plant the seeds of life on other worlds. The blood ran out, of course, but they tried to recreate the gene pool of this Deacon's blood. But instead they created something else. This is what I brought with me, sir. What David describes to Wayland confirms what I explained previously about the role the first Deacon occupied in the engineer's world. From what David translated, after the blood of the first Deacon ran out, they tried to engineer it themselves using biotechnology, which ultimately led to the creation of the black goo. Despite the fact that most people categorize Prometheus as a science fiction film, the story has a lot of religious elements. The statue of the Deacon is portrayed in the crucifix pose, which is a direct reference to Jesus, and implies that engineers also had their version of God and they did not have all the answers about the origins of life. The fact that the engineers used the blood of the first Deacon to reproduce is a direct reference to Jesus' blood, which symbolizes reincarnation and sacrifice. The movie explores this confrontation between science and religion, both of which try to answer the same question: what is the origin of life in the universe? Wayland and engineers treat life as something tangible that you can simply extend using technology, and they both fail. In their quest, engineers created humans using a substance that they could not understand or replicate, suggesting that maybe the secret of the origin of life is unattainable. Elizabeth Shaw understood that finding creators of humanity did not provide the ultimate answer about the origin of life. That's why she said to Holloway, if engineers created us, who created them? This line is a reference to all the information about the first Deacon that was cut from the movie. It also seems like at the end of Prometheus, Elizabeth Shaw chooses faith over science, after discovering that engineers, just like humans, did not have the ultimate answer to the origin of life. In an old 2017 interview, which has mysteriously been removed from everywhere on the internet, Ridley Scott discussed intriguing details about what he planned in Alien Awakening. In this old interview, Scott said that a script for Alien Awakening had already been written. Screenwriter John Logan, who performed extensive rewrites on Alien Covenant, was reported to have finished the script for Alien Awakening all the way back in 2017. Scott hinted that the sequel will delve deeper into the lore of the engineers, and fortunately I was able to save this interview before it was deleted. So when asked about Alien Awakening script, Scott said that they are being written right now.
Plans for more?
Yeah. We're being written now. There will be 3 or 4 different players coming in to investigate, one of which will be the engineers arriving back to find that planet decimated.
Implying that there would actually be multiple Alien movies. He also said that there will be 3 or 4 players who would come in to investigate Planet 4. He mentioned that the engineers would return to seek vengeance after David's devastating actions on their planet. This narrative aligns with the thematic elements of creation and destruction that have been explored in prequel films. So what's the exact story that might unfold?
Where we go next is obvious. We're going to actually go to the planet.
And according to Scott, we'll go to the planet, meaning the actual engineer homeworld. There are several possibilities where the narrative could go, especially with David and the 2,000 colonists under his control. So one potential storyline could see David reaching the true engineer homeworld, and after creating an alien queen and breeding thousands of xenomorphs, he might attempt to destroy the engineer race entirely, or at least wage a war against them. Another possibility is that David's version of the xenomorphs engineered in his own twisted vision would face off against the original xenomorph species once he arrives at the engineer homeworld. This could lead to a massive battle between the 2 xenomorph breeds, a concept explored in some of the comics. Astonishingly, some of these speculations are depicted in the recently released extra materials, which brings us to our next topic. As you probably know, Disney acquired Fox, and Marvel recently released a comic book in which David breeds an army of xenomorphs to destroy all life in the universe, which triggers the return of the engineers. Even though it's a Marvel comic, it feels very much like Alien. So let's explore what happens in this comic, as it might provide some hints about the plot of Alien Awakening movie. The story begins with David aboard the engineer Juggernaut arriving at what seems to be Planet 4. It resembles the scene from Covenant, but we soon discover that David has created 2 more synthetics in his own image, suggesting that it's a different scene from somewhere in the future. David then releases the black goo from the Juggernaut, destroying the population of this planet, another engineer colony just like Planet 4. This suggests a significant jump between the end of Covenant and the beginning of this comic. In this gap, we don't really know what David does to Daniels, but he creates 2 more versions of himself and secures another engineer Juggernaut, because it's likely way more suitable for space travel than his old Covenant ship. The comic then jumps hundreds of years into the future, where David and his clones have destroyed all organic life, fulfilling the mad synthetics goal. Then it takes David 1,000 years to progress and build a machine to access another dimension. This might sound a bit crazy, but an early draft script of Prometheus mentioned that the engineers transcended to another dimension, an idea that was later removed. Once David gains access to the multiverse, he realizes that there are other universes full of life that must also be destroyed, including the Marvel Universe. Then David and his clones travel to the Marvel Universe set in 2045. Once they arrive, David meets Tony Stark, who is now an old man, and proposes a deal to merge Stark Industries with Weyland-Yutani. However, Stark quickly realizes that David is a synthetic, not a human. This revelation enrages David, who violently attacks Stark and warns him that in 16 years his army of xenomorphs will invade Earth. True to his word, the invasion happens. However, Stark uses these 16 years of preparation to build a starship capable of evacuating approximately 15,000 humans to escape Earth before it is completely overrun by xenomorphs. In the real world, the Marvel franchise had been steeply declining in popularity, so its fictional destruction at the hands of xenomorphs feels like a brutally symbolic end. In the end, some of the Avengers fight the xenomorphs as the remnants of humanity flee Earth. But the very last scene of the issue reveals the return of the engineers who have been observing the multiverse. It seems like they have discovered either David or Earth, suggesting that this will be their next destination. The next issue, set to release in April 2025, teases a potential conflict between David and the engineers. The description reads, "The engineers go to war and that the engineers set out to destroy what they made." While I'm excited to know what happens in this comic issue when it comes out, I highly doubt that the events of this comic book are considered canon. However, it aligns with what Ridley Scott has previously stated about the engineers and Alien Awakening. The comic confirms that Planet 4 was an engineer colony and that the engineers are still alive, having not been entirely destroyed by David. It's an interesting concept that the engineers may have transcended to another dimension, remaining oblivious to the events unfolding in the universe where Prometheus takes place, an idea that originally appeared in the early drafts of Prometheus. While I highly doubt that the Alien Awakening movie will follow the storyline presented in this comic book, it's possible that certain elements from it will likely be incorporated. And this comic seems to provide a general sense of the narrative direction the studio intends to pursue with the Alien franchise. But whatever direction the story takes, it's likely to involve David's experiments culminating in the creation of an alien queen, an iconic element in the franchise's lore. It initially appeared that Ridley Scott was sidelined by the studio, which led to Alien Romulus being directed by another filmmaker, Fede Alvarez. However, it now seems that Scott actually has significant influence over what happens in the next Alien movie. Moreover, it's not just him who wants to make Alien Awakening. Alvarez doesn't seem overly eager to make a direct sequel to Romulus, emphasizing instead the importance of finding the right story. Next, we'll dive into the most detailed exploration of every single engineer and space jockey featured in both films and other media, and there are 13 of them in total. Throughout the Alien movies, various engineers appeared on the screen, each with a distinct role and mission. Interestingly, some of these figures were omitted from the final cut of Prometheus and can only be found in the Blu-ray edition. Before Prometheus hit the screens, the lore of the space jockey race had been elaborated in the comic books. They were depicted as elephantine beings reminiscent of the iconic figure from the 1979 Alien. Contrary to later interpretations, these early comics showcased the elephantine appearance as their genuine form, not a suit. So let's start with the Apocalypse space jockey. In the comic book Aliens Apocalypse, a team of scientists embarks on an exploration of an alien spacecraft, stumbling upon an ancient space jockey in a state of deep cryosleep. Interestingly, the space jockey was in what's termed as the catatonic suspension, seemingly a more advanced version of cryosleep that works on a molecular level. This particular space jockey had a strategy to endure the xenomorph infestation on his vessel by entering an extended hibernation, in hopes that the xenomorphs and their eggs would die out during his long sleep. However, his plan takes a dark turn when a scientist infects him with an alien embryo. What follows is the emergence of a massive space jockey xenomorph hybrid larger than any xenomorph we've encountered before. The Elephantine space jockey. In the comic book Aliens Outbreak, the Elephantine space jockey stands out as one of the most peculiar depictions of space jockeys. Sometimes referred to as Malak, he possesses the unique ability to telepathically communicate with his own kind, humans and even androids. This portrayal is one of the comic's initial introductions to the space jockeys. Uniquely, only his face is reminiscent of the original space jockey. The remainder of his body is shielded by a metallic exoskeleton that grants him the power to levitate above the ground. Contrary to some of his kind, he doesn't seem aggressive towards humans and even aids the colonial marines in exterminating xenomorphs. However, his assistance comes with ulterior motives. He helps Marines to survive so that he can pinpoint Earth's location for a subsequent attack. The original space jockey. The original space jockey is a fossilized pilot found by Nostromo crew in a crashed alien derelict on LV-426. Nostromo arrived on this moon to investigate an unknown distress signal. However, their mission was halted when a facehugger attacked Kane. Another group of humans returns on LV-426 decades later in the game Alien Isolation to turn off the distress beacon. The enigmatic pilot of the alien derelict ignited various speculations and theories among the fans about its origin and the origin of the xenomorph. While this intriguing figure lacked an official name, the production team simply nicknamed it Space Jockey, a title that soon became synonymous with the species. Ridley Scott really wanted the space jockey to appear as primordial fossil, possibly millions of years old, indicating that it is ancient beyond human comprehension, just like the horrors that are stored in the ship's cargo. The movie Alien offers very few details about the space jockey, perhaps on purpose, suggesting that humanity may not be prepared for the profound mysteries encapsulated by this colossal being. Interestingly, in early drafts of the original Alien, the space jockeys were envisioned as interstellar explorers who simply stumbled upon LV-426 with alien eggs stored in a giant pyramid. Originally, the space jockeys had nothing to do with the xenomorph narrative, having merely discovered them by accident. However, due to the limitations of runtime, Ridley Scott decided to merge the narrative of the space jockey species and the xenomorphs, positioning the engineer Juggernaut as a vessel transporting the alien eggs as lethal weapons. On top of that, Prometheus in the early stages was supposed to make the last surviving engineer on LV-223 as the original space jockey. The initial Prometheus script named Alien Engineers was set on LV-426, showcasing the engineer pilot's unfortunate demise due to a chestburster emergence which caused the crash of the alien vessel. Yet, as the creative process evolved, Prometheus went in an entirely new direction, with the production planning to make at least 3 prequels instead of 1. The unmistakable resemblance between the Prometheus engineer and the space jockey suggests that they might belong to the same species or at least be closely related. A conspicuous cavity in the chest of the space jockey hints that he was likely implanted with an alien embryo. This embryo burst forth, killing the pilot, and then, using its corrosive blood, melted a hole in the floor as evidenced by a visible acidic damage nearby. It's speculated that this creature, having erupted from the space jockey, laid eggs in the cargo hold where Kane later ventured. As mentioned previously, a comic book and a video game feature a colossal xenomorph emerging from the space jockey, suggesting that the creature that emerged from the LV-426 pilot might have been of the same size. Because the original space jockey is noticeably larger than the engineer in Prometheus, this difference suggests that they could be distinct subspecies of the overarching space jockey lineage. The alien vessel's history remains unknown, just like the fact if there were other space jockeys on the ship. The fact that the Juggernaut's airlocks were open, allowing the Nostromo crew to enter, has led many people to theorize that other space jockeys might have fled the ship in the past. As prequels attempted to explain the space jockey's backstory, an intriguing theory has surfaced. The entity inside the original space jockey suit might actually be David. Due to Prometheus, we know that the bone exterior is just a suit, so the question arises, who is inside of the suit of the original space jockey? And there's a good chance that it might be David. In Alien Covenant, the protomorph that David engineered lacks biomechanical traits. With David alluding to the yet-to-be-realized perfect design of his creation, some believe that he might ultimately serve as a host for the birth of the iconic xenomorph. Being an android, his body is composed of a mix of biochemistry and mechanical elements. Therefore, given an exceptionally adaptive nature of xenomorphs, if David is impregnated, this theory suggests that he might give birth to the original alien. The Elder Engineer. The Blu-ray deleted scene introduces us to the Elder Engineer, who led the sacrifice ceremony to seed Earth with building blocks of life that eventually led to the emergence of humans. This character's distinct appearance, different from the sacrifice engineer and others, hints at his unique role. From the clues given, it appears that he was the high priest orchestrating the sacrifice ritual. The early script reveals that engineers have lifespans stretching into hundreds of thousands of years. In Prometheus, the Elder Engineer, acting in his high priest capacity, hands the sacrifice engineer an elusive substance, leading him to dissolve into foundational life elements, seemingly the precursors to humanity. The film leaves the nature of this goldish substance ambiguous, but the script unveils it as the blood of the first Deacon, a creature responsible for the engineer's reproduction and birthing life on other planets. The deleted scene also briefly showcases two more Elder Engineers. Their faces might be obscured in the deleted scene, but additional materials offer a closer glimpse. Their appearance suggests that they also occupied priest-like positions subordinate to the High Priest. Another interesting detail is that all engineers in the deleted scene appear to be extremely old, except of the sacrifice engineer. The Alien Master narrative used as the foundation for the Prometheus script mentions that the engineer civilization gradually lost the ability to reproduce, which is supported by the fact that there is only one young engineer in the group. The sacrifice engineer is the next figure we encounter, and his body becomes the foundational material for life on Earth. Notably younger than his counterparts, it's possible the engineer society selected their most genetically superior individual for this ritual. The engineers seem to have worshipped the Deacon, a creature that kills its host, possibly indicating that the sacrifice is the essential belief in the engineer culture. The sacrifice ceremony mirrors various earthy sacrificial practices where an exceptional specimen is chosen for the offering. It's worth noting that the engineers at the start of Prometheus travel in a disc-shaped vessel, in contrast to the craft we observe in Prometheus, Alien Covenant, and other films in the Alien series. This distinction might imply that the engineers in the film's opening represent a religious sect, while others we see are more scientifically inclined. The LV-223 engineer, also called the Last Engineer, stands as the lone survivor of the pathogen incident in the temple on LV-223. Arguably, the most interesting scene in Prometheus centers around the awakening of this engineer, representing the climax of the film where humanity confronts its creator. This anticipated encounter, however, doesn't proceed as expected. In that scene that was ultimately cut from the final version, David, the android, successfully communicates with the engineer. In their interaction, Wayland asks the engineer for the gift of eternal life. But the engineer responds, what makes Wayland so exceptional to warrant such a gift? While the deleted scene only showcases a short exchange, the early draft script dedicates 5 pages to an in-depth dialogue between Wayland, the engineer, and David, shedding light on the engineer's history and their reasons for deciding to eradicate humanity. And if you're interested in that scene, you might want to watch my video that dives deep into this conversation. It's also worth noting that the engineers introduced in Prometheus were largely based on Anunnaki, a group of Sumerian deities that, according to ancient tablets, came to Earth and created humans. At certain times in history, Anunnaki were also dissatisfied with their creations, orchestrating various catastrophes to destroy human civilizations. Having been in cryosleep for over 2 millennia, the Last Engineer was originally part of a faction set on erasing humanity. Fortunately, their inability to control the pathogen led to a devastating outbreak, killing all engineers on LV-223 except this one. As mentioned previously, the opening scene of Prometheus depicts engineers wearing robes, hinting at a religious undertone. In contrast, the Last Engineer wears a unique biotech suit, perhaps suggesting his association with a scientific faction. This supports the idea that LV-223 was a scientific outpost where engineers developed a bioweapon, the Black Goo. However, early scripts and extra materials suggest that they were initially trying to replicate the blood of the first Deacon, a substance known to create new life. However, they failed. And in their failure, they realized that they created something else, a dangerous pathogen that brings death instead of new life. Similarly to the contrast between science and religion in human society, Prometheus in essence juxtaposes religious beliefs and scientific endeavors within the engineer society, where the science faction tried to replicate the blood of the engineer deity and it went horribly wrong. Just like engineers in the comics, the Last Engineer has a deep hatred for humans that stems from humanity's deviation from the desired path set by the engineers. Engineers also harbor a strong aversion towards artificial beings, leading the Last Engineer to destroy David. In contrast, engineers hold such admiration for biological creations that even their ships are partially alive, and they possess a strong distaste for electronic entities like David. The Last Engineer, driven by deep hatred for humanity, attempts to finish his 2,000-year-old mission to destroy all life on Earth. However, his plan goes awry again when the Prometheus vessel collides with the Juggernaut, halting his mission. The Last Engineer survives the explosion, and following a physical fight with Shaw, he becomes impregnated with the trilobite, eventually birthing a creature resembling a Deacon. The precise nature of this being remains ambiguous. While the mural depicts a Deacon worshipped by engineers as a deity, it is uncertain if the creature birthed by the Last Engineer is the same as the godlike figure from the mural. The Ambassador Space Jockey. In the comic book called The Alien, Earth is overwhelmed by a xenomorph outbreak, leaving the remaining humans in space stations orbiting the planet. The Ambassador Space Jockey arrives aboard a Juggernaut ship, seemingly offering assistance to humans in eradicating the xenomorphs. However, when the Space Jockey meets the President and his council, he turns hostile, revealing his true objective: to exterminate all life on Earth. The President employs a unique weapon, a chestburster, which emerges from him to assault the Ambassador Space Jockey. The president makes the ultimate sacrifice to slow down the aggressor, and one of the androids manages to send a signal to Earth to deploy missiles and destroy the Juggernaut with the space jockey. This encounter reinforces the notion that engineers as species are inherently violent towards humans and other life forms, with a predominant mission of their annihilation. Beings on Planet 4. The inhabitants of Planet 4 are a subject of debate whether they are engineers or not, with even Ridley Scott providing conflicting explanations of who they actually are. In some interviews, Scott identifies them as engineers and claims that Planet 4 is the engineer homeworld. Yet in other interviews, he says that engineers will return in future movies to discover what David has done on their planet, suggesting that the Planet 4 inhabitants might not be the original engineers, but rather a colony just like Earth created by the actual engineers. These beings have some resemblance to engineers in Prometheus with their pale skin and hairless appearance. However, they have more differences than similarities. Their eyes aren't fully dark and look like human eyes. They are also similar in size to humans, in contrast with the towering height of engineers. They wear primitive robes looking like peasants, a stark deviation from the technologically advanced appearance and proficiency with machinery exhibited by the engineers in Prometheus. While the Planet 4 residents had access to juggernauts, which is revealed in a deleted scene, they seemed unfamiliar with their operation and had no knowledge on how to fly them. In addition, their city appeared somewhat ancient, with the Juggernaut docking station having a completely different design from the rest of the city, suggesting that it's not from this planet. All this evidence suggests that the Planet 4 beings might be a colony frequently visited by the actual engineers. Their joyful reception of David's Juggernaut indicates that they might have been anticipating the return of their celestial creators, engineers, for quite some time. However, there is another theory about who these beings might be. The inhabitants of Planet 4 wear robes similar to the engineers in the beginning of Prometheus, suggesting that they could belong to the same group. We don't have a clear reference to determine the height of engineers from the deleted scene in Prometheus, so they might have been shorter than the last engineer on LV-223, sharing similar height with humans and beings on Planet 4. This theory supports the idea mentioned previously that there might be two distinct factions of engineers. One faction could be more religious, wearing robes and constructing stone cities like the one we see in Alien Covenant. Meanwhile, the group on LV-223 could represent a scientific faction driven by a quest to unlock the secrets of the universe through science and biotechnology, even enhancing their height with genetic engineering. Had Prometheus not faced such critique upon its release, subsequent films might have delved deeper into the lore of the engineers and possibly explored the duality of science and religion. There is another subset of this theory which states that the engineers on LV-223 are drones or synthetics similarly to David. The original engineers could have created these biorobots to conduct dangerous experiments since they didn't want to do it themselves. Just like Wayland made David smarter and stronger than any human, the original engineers also made their synthetics in the image of their ideal, which explains why the LV-223 engineer looks so perfect compared to humanoids on Planet 4. Fire and Stone Engineer. The comic book Predator Fire and Stone features another engineer that was encountered on LV-223 about 100 years after the events of Prometheus. Predator Ahab, having a long-standing ambition to hunt engineers, teams up with his human ally Galgo to track the space jockey to LV-223. Upon locating the engineer, a fierce battle breaks down between Ahab and the space jockey. Despite Ahab's efforts using his wrist gauntlet to inflict a wound on the engineer's face, the engineer retaliates with immense strength, injuring Ahab severely by fracturing his arm and leg. He launches several spears, one of which pierces the engineer's chest, yet the engineer remains unfazed. Then Galgo aids Ahab by firing a laser gun which slows the engineer for a few moments. In a last-ditch effort, Ahab activates his self-destruct mechanism to obliterate the ship and the engineer. Ahab later returns to the wreckage, securing the engineer's skull as a trophy. Life and Death engineers. In the comic book series Predator: Life and Death, 2 other engineers are introduced. Colonial Marines, while chasing a Yautja clan, arrive on LV-797 and stumble upon a Juggernaut ship. Inside, they find an engineer in stasis within a sarcophagus. Upon awakening, this engineer pilots the Juggernaut to LV-223. Once there, he awakens another engineer who's notably aggressive and hostile. Together, these engineers devise a plan to annihilate all life on the moon, targeting both the indigenous life forms and the colonial marines who had followed the engineer from LV-797. In a fierce battle, the colonial marines, with assistance from Predator Ahab, managed to overpower the space jockeys. Thank you guys for watching. What are your thoughts about the original space jockey and other engineers introduced in the prequels? Should they have kept them as 2 separate races, and who do you think is the original space jockey? Hello guys, Croft is here. In this video I'll break down the ending of Alien Romulus with a particular focus on the engineer hybrid creature we encountered. I'll also explain how the black goo caused that mutation and how the next film might eventually intersect with David's storyline, potentially setting the stage for Alien Awakening. One of the most surprising and exciting moments in the movie was the appearance of the engineer hybrid at the very end, a twist that I never expected. The inclusion of this engineer element suggests that their storyline will play a significant role in the franchise moving forward, especially given the central importance of the black goo compound. What's truly thrilling is that this new creature resembles the engineer far more than it does xenomorphs or humans, hinting at the potential resurgence of engineer-related storylines in the upcoming installments. So before delving into the specifics of this hybrid creature, it's important to understand the events that led to its creation, and why it bears such a striking resemblance to the engineers. And to do that, we need to revisit the Romulus lab, where Rook explains the process he used to obtain the compound that seems to be a version of the black goo. When Rain, Andy, and Tyler enter the Romulus lab, Rain notices the black liquid forming on top of a container and asks, "What is that?" Tyler speculates it's probably some messed up bioweapon, but Rook corrects him, saying, "Actually, it's quite the opposite." Andy then describes the dire situation facing humanity. "Our colonies are dying, unbearable temperatures, novel diseases every cycle, toxic mine fumes. It's all one unforeseen tragedy after another." Rook continues, explaining, "Mankind was never truly suited for space colonization. It's simply too fragile, too weak. The work of the station is meant to change that. The perfect organism, that's how we should refer to human beings." So I set this one right. I took its gift for humanity. Inside the parasite which I engineered from this animosity and AI, I discovered a unique non-Newtonian fluid. Life in its most primal and unadulterated form. This microorganism can be the most destructive pathogen ever observed. But as synthesized in our lab, I turned it into the miracle Mr. Wayland died searching for. Prometheus fire, the divine gift for humanity. Z01 contains the genome responsible for the xenomorph's ability to accelerate and slow down its metabolism at will. Its symbiotic catalyst easily rewrites a host's DNA through its blood. This is a much needed and long overdue upgrade for humanity. So let's break down what Rook really meant. Weyland-Yutani recovered the xenomorph frozen in ice from the first Alien movie. It seems like using the xenomorph DNA, the company was able to bioengineer the facehuggers, although the exact method remains unclear given the absence of traditional xenomorph eggs from which facehuggers hatch. It seems that these facehuggers were incubated and developed in the lab without the usual ovomorphs. A plausible explanation could be that Rook's team received David's transmission that is shown in the deleted scene of Alien Covenant, where David details his process of creating alien eggs. However, the film doesn't explicitly mention this, leaving us with a lot to speculate about how exactly Rook and other scientists engineered facehuggers. However, once they did have a batch of facehuggers, it seems like they began experimenting on them and extracted a black substance. Rook referred to it as life in its most primal and unadulterated form, while showing the black goo urn, the same one we saw in the Prometheus temple. As Rook explained, the initial goal for this pathogen was to enhance human durability and grant full control over their metabolism, making them more resilient for space colonization. While they may have succeeded in this regard, the cost of these mutations could be the loss of most human traits, as we witness in the film's final scene. Rook also referred to this pathogen as the Prometheus fire that Wayland died searching for, implying that the substance they derived from facehuggers is either equivalent to or a synthesized version of the black goo. They called this compound Z01, and it's unclear how it differs from the original engineer's black goo, but it's strongly implied that they are similar or even equivalent. There's a whole separate rabbit hole about what exactly the engineer's black goo was in the temple. Eventually it became some sort of a weaponized pathogen intended to be dropped on Earth. It's also possible that violent mutations are perceived as something positive from the engineer's perspective. Instead of the negative interpretation as a bioweapon, the black goo could have been something that transforms humans into xenomorph-like creatures, similar to the Deacon that engineers worshipped. Perhaps whatever happened to Fifield and Prometheus was the intended purpose of the black goo, suggesting that the engineers didn't intend to destroy humanity but rather to perfect it or mutate it, turning humans into violent beasts like Fifield. Digging even deeper, it appears that the black goo might have been a failed attempt to reverse engineer the goldish substance seen at the beginning of Prometheus. Instead of creating new life forms in the engineer's image, the black goo caused violent mutations, leading the engineers to repurpose it as a weapon. Going even deeper, a theory that I explore in my other videos suggests that the goldish substance that the engineer drank was actually the blood of their deity, the first Deacon, depicted in the temple. So they might have tried to reverse engineer the blood of their lord, but failed, leading to their downfall. Since the engineer's blood is black, it's possible that the black goo is a mutated version of their blood, containing both engineer and xenomorph DNA. On top of that, in the Romulus lab, there is a recording of a rat being smashed and then injected with the Z01 pathogen. The rat regenerates quickly, leading Andy, Ryan, and Tyler to believe that the pathogen can heal severe injuries. However, as they leave the lab, the same rat is seen mutated beyond its original state into a grotesque rodent-like xenomorph hybrid, suggesting that the compound is not safe and can lead to unpredictable mutations, a fate that later befalls on a human fetus. Rook instructs Andy to salvage a vial of the Z01 pathogen and bring it back to Jackson's colony. On their way to the ship Corbellan, the group finds Kay, who is severely injured. Andy suggests that Kay injects herself with the Z01 pathogen, unaware of the consequences seen in the rat. However, Rain stops her from doing so, but as Kay's condition deteriorates upon reaching Corbellan, she decides to inject herself with the compound anyway, and what happens to her is extremely strange. In Prometheus and Alien Covenant, we saw 4 different effects that the black goo had on organisms. First, David tricked Holloway into consuming the black goo, and Charlie later conceived a child with Elizabeth Shaw. Charlie then began experiencing extreme pain and skin mutations, but we never saw the full effects of the goo as Vickers burned him alive. However, because he impregnated Elizabeth Shaw while infected, an alien embryo grew inside her. The trilobite was later extracted and then grew to an enormous size, ultimately impregnating the engineer, leading to the birth of the Deacon, possibly a xenomorph predecessor. Another victim of the black goo was Fifield. He fell into a puddle of black goo which got through his melting helmet and entered his body. Within a day, his body was completely transformed, more durable and deformed, but devoid of humanity. So the black goo essentially turned him into a hostile xenomorph-like monster. However, in Alien Covenant, the black goo had a totally different effect on humanoid beings on Planet 4. It didn't really cause any mutations, but instead, the bodies seemed to burn and solidify much like after a volcanic eruption. In Alien Romulus, the reaction was also really different. After injecting the pathogen, Kay appears tired, but her condition is not critical. Once Andy and Rain reach the Kerbellan, they place Kay in cryosleep. Kay had previously mentioned that she was pregnant, but as she enters the cryopod, her belly is completely flat. Yet within about 10 minutes, the fetus inside her grows rapidly and she gives birth to a strange egg-like shape which Rain throws into the corridor. This egg reminded me of the strange yellow sac that came out of the engineer at the end of Prometheus along with the Deacon. Inside this egg, however, Rain finds a mutated baby, a hybrid between human, xenomorph, and engineer. The egg secretes acid similar to xenomorph blood, burning through the floor and falling into the cargo section onto some soil that is resistant to acid. Then Kay starts to experience mutations herself. It's not entirely clear, but it appears that her skin begins to peel off, or the milk she secretes is black and slimy. Rain descends into the cargo section, but because this hybrid creature grows so rapidly, it escapes and returns to the cryosleep chamber. It almost kills Andy and appears to be eating Kay, an extremely disturbing scene. To me, this hybrid creature was the scariest part of the film. It was truly ugly, grotesque, and disgusting, a complete abomination of a human and engineer. It evoked a strong emotional response that this thing should not exist. This creature possessed very few human traits, but was mostly similar to the engineer hybridized with the xenomorph. The hybrid had almost pitch-black eyes like the engineer's, but also pale skin and gills-like textures on its neck. In addition to its enormous size, probably even taller than the engineer's in Prometheus. It also had protruding rib formations in its chest, similar to the fossilized space jockey. A unique trait of this hybrid was a disgusting, snake-like tongue, almost like a flexible xenomorph's inner jaw. I thought the newborn hybrid in Alien Resurrection was scary, but this creature is far worse. And the reason it resembled the engineer so closely is likely because, as I mentioned earlier, the black goo is similar to the engineer's blood, as according to one theory it was an attempt to synthesize the blood of the first Deacon, the engineer lord. The black goo, or the Z01 pathogen, contains DNA of both xenomorphs and engineers, which explains why the hybrid has traits from both. As Rain confronts the creature and tries to freeze it, the hybrid attacks her, breaking one of the cryosleep fuel tanks. The cryofuel slows down the creature, but Rain also almost succumbs to the freezing effects of the fuel. She barely manages to reach a pressure suit and confronts the creature in the cargo hold. Just like the engineers are extremely hostile to humans, this hybrid also appears to be inherently violent and aggressive. In the cargo hold, Rain attaches herself to a steel cable and burns a hole in the floor with the acid left in the egg from which the hybrid emerged. This decompresses the ship, almost sucking the hybrid out into space. Rain then releases the cargo hold, which falls onto the planet's rings, destroying this hybrid abomination. Rain pulls herself back onto the ship and puts Andy in cryosleep, who appears to be completely broken. Rain swears that she'll fix him, and she takes out his hard drive, which appears to contain his consciousness, suggesting that if Andy's current body is no longer functional, he could potentially be brought back to life in another body. Another major point is that the Yevaga colony where they're headed is an independent and fully terraformed world, separate from Weyland-Yutani, where synthetics aren't allowed. Therefore, it's not clear what will happen to Andy. His body will likely be discarded, but Rain might still find a way to communicate with him by uploading his consciousness onto a computer or possibly into another synthetic. So the movie ends with Rain entering cryosleep with a few vials of Z01 pathogen somewhere on the ship. Rook mentioned that the Z01 pathogen is something that's extremely valuable to Weyland-Yutani. Knowing that the company would do anything to retrieve their assets, it's highly likely that Rain and Andy will be pursued by the corporation, which leads us to speculate what might happen next. There are many possibilities for a sequel. One scenario could involve the company contacting David to intercept Rain and retrieve the Z01 pathogen, which could be an interesting way to reconnect with David's storyline. It's also possible that when Rain reaches the Ivaga colony, it's already been taken over by David, with the entire planet infested with xenomorphs or other creatures born from David's experiments. One reason we didn't see David in this movie is that Michael Fassbender could be too costly and not all fans are excited for his storyline. However, since Alien Romulus already appears to be financially successful, David could make an excellent villain in the next Alien movie. The Ancient Citizens of Lethe's Xeno City is an obscure link to the space jockeys or their distant predecessors. Initially, cultist miners discovered these towering humanoid beings deep underground. Then, colonial marines ventured into the same labyrinth where they found the ancient citizens fused with the biomechanical walls. Their skeletal remains display elongated heads, massive pelvis bones, and an absence of functional jaws or legs. Tubes snake across their chests and into their mouths, hinting at a bond with the city's living structure. These ancient citizens appear even larger than the space jockey on LV-426, suggesting an older or divergent lineage. Based on their striking resemblance to engineers and space jockeys, we can speculate that they engaged in advanced genetic or biomechanical engineering. We can also speculate that they bred xenomorphs or suffered a xenomorph infestation unleashed as a biological weapon. Their city, sometimes called the biomechanical hive, mirrors engineered constructions in Prometheus. And just as humans viewed the Prometheus engineers as gods, the space jockeys may have regarded the ancients as their own deities. In comic books, humans actually discovered similar engineered cities featuring designs reminiscent of H.R. Giger's unsettling aesthetic. But one thing is certain, Xeno City and its ancient citizens hold many secrets about engineer mythology, secrets that suggest their history is even deeper and far more complex than previously imagined. In the video game Aliens Dark Descent, one ancient citizen birthed the Titan Xenomorph after contact with an unusually large facehugger. The Titan Xenomorph then devastated the ruins, and the colonial marines eventually destroyed the Xeno City with nuclear blasts, erasing much of what remained. In many ways, the ancient citizens are an homage to the pilot from the original Alien, illustrating how diverse and far-reaching the engineer influence might be. Concept artist Richard Massa described them as a symbol of both majestic organism and slavery to the ancient alien society, suggesting that they, like the space jockeys, were bound by the higher purpose or biological directives of their creators. It's actually fascinating that the ancient citizens appears to be significantly larger than the original space jockeys seen in the derelict on LV-426. Suggesting that the further we delve into the engineers' distant past, the more colossal these ancient race might have been. This disparity in size may also indicate that these ancient citizens represent an even older lineage or a divergent offshoot of the engineer species, highlighting just how long these beings have existed, since script sources and lore imply that engineers can live for hundreds of thousands of years. There's plenty of evidence to suggest that the remnants of their civilization are scattered throughout the alien universe, hinting at a much deeper, more intricate history of a species that has largely faded into myth. Hey guys, Croft is here. In today's video I'll be covering the translation of the opening dialogue between engineers that was unfortunately deleted from Prometheus. In the theatrical version, we only witness a lone engineer approaching the waterfall. However, in the Blu-ray edition, multiple engineers take part in the sacrifice ceremony. This deleted scene may be the most important scene in the franchise, but there's even deeper hidden layer to it. The early Prometheus script actually has a dialogue between engineers and the scene that reveals a few mysteries from the movie. This extended conversation between engineers only appears in the early Prometheus script, and it was removed even from the Blu-ray deleted scene. This extended opening with the translated dialogue sheds light on the engineer mythology and the reasons they created humanity and later decided to destroy it. I always felt like the engineer scenes were unusually short, as if the production team really wanted to edit them out for some reason. However, the deleted material explains some of the engineer's actions and motivations in the movie that otherwise would seem confusing. So let's actually review the deleted scene with the engineer dialogue in the script. The shadow hovers over the river and gets smaller as it lands on the rocky ground next to the river. There is a rumbling of iron as the unseen vessel's gangplank opens. 3 cloaked humanoid beings, engineers, step down from the gangplank and onto the rocks. One of these engineers stops and allows the other 2 to continue without him. Although the deleted scene does not perfectly follow the script, various behind-the-scene photos and concept materials pretty much confirm that this was the original scene that Ridley Scott was planning to film. However, something happened during the production process or in the editing room, so we only got to see about 10% of what was intended to be in the opening scene. The 2 engineers, one walking behind the other, stop right next to the river. They turn and face each other. The one standing closest to the river has a young, majestic, pure white face and black eyes. The other is hundreds of thousands of years older than him, and that is evident from the elder's wrinkled, thin, and almost wood-like skin. The elder holds out a box, simple but complex design, and kneels down on the rocks and holds up the box. The elder, "Take this, this is the blood of our Lord, for we cannot create as the gift was stripped from us long ago. As always, we will continue our attempts to create a perfect Eden, much like our own. You, the chosen one, will create it in your own image." The young engineer kneels down and bows his head to the elder. He takes the box. Before we get to the rest of the scene, let's unpack what we just learned from this small passage that is crucial to the understanding of the engineer lore. The box that the elder engineer has in the script is actually the same cup or a bowl that we see in the movie that has a smaller cup with a goldish liquid inside. The elder engineer refers to it as the blood of our Lord, which is later revealed in the script to be the blood of the first Deacon, a godlike creature portrayed on the mural that the engineers worshipped. When the Prometheus crew entered the temple, we can barely see the obscure carving on the wall depicting a xenomorph-like creature that is actually an ancient engineer deity, the first Deacon that they were trying to resurrect. In the movie, right in front of the Deacon mural, we saw a green crystal. However, instead of this crystal, there was supposed to be the sacrificial bowl from the beginning of the movie. The same bowl that contained the blood of the engineer Lord, the first Deacon. There are a few behind-the-scene photos with this bowl instead of the green crystal, and this bowl also appears in the trailer, confirming that the Deacon and its blood were supposed to play a much bigger role in the movie. So who is the first Deacon, why engineers consider this creature their lord, and why its blood allowed them to create life on other planets and procreate? Let's first answer these questions before we review the rest of the deleted scene. The elder engineer also says, "For we cannot create as the gift was stripped from us long ago," referring to the fact that for some reason engineers lost their ability to reproduce, which brings us to the most interesting part of this video. To fully understand what the elder said and answer these questions, we need to look into the Prometheus documentary that actually explains the entire history of engineers and their complex relationship with humans. The official Prometheus documentary also reveals why engineers lost their ability to reproduce. For a few seconds, the documentary shows something called the master narrative that not only clarifies the engineer lore, but also explains why engineers created humanity and why they potentially decided to end it. By looking at the master narrative, this is what we're able to read. Their civilization, meaning the engineer civilization, is millions of years old. Once, engineers expressed themselves as humans do, taking pleasure in music, color, and story, but they've long since learned to see in more dimensions than we do. Their arts and ornaments exist on planes unperceptible to human senses. Their constructions look dark and grim to us, but the engineer's eyes see far more than our own. From this paragraph, we learn that engineers are able to visually perceive the world in a greater spectrum, which is the reason their eyes are dark and blurry and their arts and ornaments aren't visible to humans. The next paragraph explains why the gift of creation was stripped from engineers and they could only procreate with the blood of the first Deacon, just like the elder said. Individual engineers live for 100,000 years. Ages ago, their race abandoned sex and gender and started reproducing by more abstract methods. In recent millennia, they have ceased to reproduce altogether. Looks like using radical technological innovations, engineers found a way to reproduce through artificial methods, and over time, they forgot how to procreate in natural ways. However, at some point their artificial methods like the blood of the first Deacon failed, but they already changed their biology so much that the natural methods were not available either. This concept illustrates the dark side of technology, which can replace some fundamental aspects of our lives to the point that our survival becomes dangerously dependent on this technology. For example, right now, most of the information, including the internet, is stored on electronic hard drives. Even the instructions about how to build these hard drives, computers, and even factories. So in the case of some cataclysmic event that destroys all electronics, like a giant solar flare, all information on these hard drives would be lost. And it would take a long time until we can recover all the lost information and rebuild the technology to the same level. The master narrative proves that Ridley Scott and his team came up with really original and creative ideas. However, they were too different from the established alien lore, which is likely the reason the studio had to cut most of them from the film. The next paragraph shows even more extreme ideas that the writers were exploring at early stages. The engineers believe themselves to be on the verge of a great evolution, a transcendence in which they will abandon their physical form and take flight into the 10-dimensional universe as creatures of pure energy. I feel like this part of the engineer lore was not developed in the consecutive scripts because the studio was already taking a bit of a risk by introducing engineers, the Black Goo, and the Deacon, and even these themes were barely explored. The next paragraphs from the master narrative had a few blank spots because of the way the pages were presented in the documentary. However, we can still get the majority of the text. Engineers shepherded the human race towards sentience and civilization. They altered their DNA, their habitat, teaching humanity teachers. This sentence implies that engineers helped humans in the transitioning to civilization and were teaching their teachers, which may imply that they taught Jesus or Enoch, just like it's mentioned in the draft script. The next paragraph reads, they believed humanity would be ready to receive the gift of the engineer knowledge and move through universe as scientists just as engineers did before them, perhaps to reach transcendence on their own. The engineer knowledge in this paragraph could mean some sort of a technological or societal breakthrough similar to the agricultural revolution or the transition to information age with the internet. The engineer knowledge can also refer to the scene in Alien Covenant when David mentioned that he learned the engineer ways, which allowed him to control their ships. A research station was set up on LV-426, a moon in a nearby system. Benefactors studied the problem of humanity and prepared something. These two paragraphs imply that engineers wanted to give humanity the engineer knowledge that would drastically advance human civilization. However, humans had some kind of a flaw that stopped engineers from giving their knowledge. Ridley Scott actually explained in a podcast what this human flaw actually is. When talking about the reason engineers hated humanity, he said it is because humans are violent species and one should just look at what is happening around the world to see that. The master narrative also confirms that the temple on LV-426 was a type of a research laboratory where engineers were doing their bioexperiments. From the alien master narrative, we learned that engineers lost their ability to reproduce because they started procreating with technology, and eventually their biology changed to the point that they could not reproduce naturally anymore, which is the reason they had to use the blood of the first Deacon, their version of God, to create new life and procreate. The early script explains who the first Deacon creature was, but before we get to it, let's review the rest of the deleted opening scene. The Elder speaks, primitive yet complex, clicks and talks not unlike an aboriginal bushman. The Elder, let your body become the dirt, your blood become the waters, and may your soul become their way back to us. And even though there were no subtitles, we can easily understand what's happening here. They're saying goodbye. One last look between the three, a sense of importance, something meaningful is about to happen here. With this particular choice of words, the script clearly conveys that this scene was a religious ceremony, which is not really the impression we get from the movie. In the opening sequence, engineers created humanity using the blood of their god, which brings a question: who was this Deacon deity that is also portrayed on the mural? In the scene when the crew enters the temple, David translates engineer writings on the wall and reveals the translation to Wayland. Our Lord came from the Chosen One in the time when our ancestors birthed life. His sacred blood was our salvation. His sacred blood through our lips birthed life on other worlds. When David communicated with Wayland in his sleep, he further explained what he learned from the writings. Somewhere in their late history, engineers evolved and lost the ability to both mate and reproduce. But before they did, they found a creature, presumably an ancient facehugger, that impregnated one of them with a foreign body. A creature came from him, they called it the Deacon. They, engineers, worshipped this Deacon, and after its death, they used its blood to plant the seeds of life on other worlds. The blood ran out, of course, but they tried to recreate the gene pool of this Deacon's blood, but instead they created something else. From the early script, we learned that when the blood of the first Deacon ran out, engineers were trying to re-engineer it themselves, which resulted in the black goo. This aspect of the engineer lore was completely removed, and Prometheus never really explained what the black goo actually was. However, the early script finally puts the missing pieces of the puzzle in their place. After engineers lost their ability to reproduce, they were procreating using the blood of the first Deacon, presumably a sentient version of a xenomorph. After the Deacon's death, the attempt to bioengineer its blood led to the creation of the black goo, or the pathogen, a substance that does the complete opposite of creating new life. It creates violent monsters. What do you guys think about the opening engineer dialogue? Do you think it should have been included in the movie, at least with subtitles, or do you think it would have removed some of the mystery surrounding engineers? Thank you guys for watching, like this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to the channel for more alien content. My name is Croft and I'll see you in the next video. Hello guys, Croft is here. Did the engineers create the predators? That's an interesting question that I'm going to discuss in this video. If you guys enjoy my content, please make sure to subscribe and click the notification bell to not miss any new videos. Before we begin to look at the evidence in the movies and other sources whether the engineers created the Predators or the Yautja, I think it's important to establish what is canon in Alien and Predator universes. And as you probably know, if we accept that Alien and Predator franchises are in the same world, we have a few major plot holes. Alien Covenant suggests that David created the Xenomorphs, and even Ridley Scott himself in a few interviews confirmed that David is in fact the creator of Xenomorph species. Therefore, Alien vs Predator movies cannot be in the Alien canon simply because they happen about 80 years before David creates Xenomorphs, which means that all Predator movies are not in the Alien canon. Similarly, Alien movies cannot be in the Predator canon either, because in Alien vs Predator of 2004, Mr. Weyland dies, and in Prometheus, Peter Weyland is still alive. In addition to that, Ridley Scott mentioned that he had no interest in connecting Predator and Alien franchises, and said that Alien vs Predator wasn't a great idea. All that is to say that Alien and Predator canon are kind of messed up and have a few major contradictory elements. We cannot deny and disregard all the comic books, video games, and movies with Predators, Xenomorphs, and Engineers seemingly appearing in the same world. So they are kind of in the same universe, but it's not officially canon because of Alien Covenant. Blade Runner movies, on the other hand, are in the Alien canon, and you can check out my other video to see how they are connected. Despite seemingly contradictory facts like death of Mr. Weyland in AVP and David creating the Xenomorphs, I found a way to explain how these elements can fit together in the same universe so that Engineers creating Predators makes more sense. In Alien vs Predator of 2004, Charles Bishop Weyland is the chairman and probably the biggest shareholder of Weyland Industries. And we also know that Peter Weyland's father was a self-taught engineer. So the reasonable explanation might be that Bishop Weyland, who founded Weyland Industries, is the father of Peter Weyland, who inherited his shares of the company and turned Weyland Industries into Weyland Corporation after his father's death in AVP. To me, it seems like it would be a good correction for the continuity error caused by Prometheus. Then we can also make sense of the fact that Xenomorphs existed and were hunted by Predators even before David quote-unquote created them in Alien Covenant. From the alternative scene in Prometheus, we know that Fifield was transforming into a Xenomorph due to the contact with the black goo. So it's fair to assume that the black goo actually has the Xenomorph DNA. So all what David did is that he took the black goo and after many experiments found a way to properly manipulate it in order to grow eggs with facehuggers that would impregnate hosts to span Xenomorphs. In other words, Xenomorphs existed way before Alien Covenant but almost went extinct, possibly due to predator hunts or just their inability to reproduce without a host body. However, their DNA was preserved in the black goo, so David simply revived the Xenomorph species using the pathogen. This explanation also fits with the narrative in the early Prometheus script, so that the black goo produces Deacons after the contact with Engineers, and Xenomorphs after the contact with humans. That would explain why David needed a human host, Elizabeth, to make facehugger eggs. These explanations would fix contradictions of AVP movies and allow Predators, Engineers, and Xenomorphs to exist in the same universe without continuity errors. I think Fox will have to come up with something like this if they're going to make a crossover between Predators and Engineers, which I really hope they do. Finally, after we got canon questions out of the way, did the Engineers create the Predators if they exist in the same universe? Engineers got their name because they created or quote-unquote engineered life on Earth, and it's implied in Prometheus that it was some kind of scientific or religious experiment. Then it's easy to consider the possibility that Earth was not the only planet that engineers seeded with life, and that there were other planets in the cosmos where engineers created some kind of life form at some point in the past. I made a few videos exploring the early Prometheus script in which engineer dialogues are extended, and we learn many things that were not included in the movie. At one point, the awakened engineer says to Wayland that many worlds have been crafted by the hand of our fathers, and that yours was the only one that was successful. You should take a look at my in-depth analysis videos of the script if you want to learn more about it. The engineer's statement alone proves the fact that I mentioned earlier. Engineers seeded many planets with life. It's also mentioned that Earth was their only successful experiment, so I'll get back to this point in just a moment. If we know that engineers created multiple life forms, that predators exist in the same universe, and that engineers were present at least 4 billion years ago when the life on Earth started, then it's logical to conclude that the engineers created the predators and not vice versa. In addition, engineers have a bigger lifespan compared to predators, as it says in the script that engineers can live up to a few 100,000 years, as opposed to predators who can live up to a few 100 years. In the Predator Requiem movie, we can actually see the skull of the space jockey as one of the trophies, which once again confirms the connection between these two species. And as you can see, it has this elephant-like structure, which is probably due to the fact that AVP Requiem came out before Prometheus, so they assumed that the biosuit was a permanent part of an engineer's body. Ridley Scott called engineers gardeners of space in one of the interviews, so it's very possible that they created all the life forms in the galaxy or the entire universe, which literally makes them gods. However, another question is unanswered: why engineers considered only creation of life on Earth a success, but not the predators or people on the planet 4 in Alien Covenant? When it comes to the planet 4, the reason might be that humanoids on this planet did not progress at the same fast rate as humans did, which would indicate that their intellect is inferior to human cognitive abilities. For the predators, there might be a few reasons. Perhaps engineers considered predators an extremely hostile race despite being technologically advanced. So their aggression and desire for hunt outweighed highly sophisticated technologies that predators developed. Another reason relates to a conflict between predators and engineers. As I mentioned earlier, predators have killed engineers based on this trophy. Therefore, it's highly likely that there was some kind of a war or at least a conflict between predators and engineers. It's possible that the predator species turned against engineers and wanted to destroy them. This idea would fit to the common theme of Prometheus and Alien movies, which is creation wanting to destroy their creators, like David turning against humans and Peter Wayland in particular. This analogy also applies to xenomorphs, since they have to kill host bodies that basically give them life. Therefore, a war between engineers and predators is very likely, and we might even get some glimpses of it in the future Alien films. That would give a possible explanation to why engineers build so many military bases as we've seen in Prometheus, as if they were engaged in a military conflict with another race. So the engineers did in fact create the predators, and even though officially canon for Predator and Alien are kind of messed up, this theory makes total sense. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like the video if you enjoyed it, and leave a comment if you believe that the engineers created the predators.